also Catholic charities. At that time, actually, it was a Italian Catholic charities, which used to be called the Caritas Internationales. So it was supporting the refugees and also helped Dr. Mujemanyi Frodwar to set up the clinic, the first medical clinic for refugees who had fled Rwanda in the eastern DRC. So he was the only person, he was the only surgeon actually who were doing the operations on all refugees and the local people, local Congolese who had serious wounds. So the nuns, the Catholic nuns, organized how he could leave Kamanyola and go to Panzi. So that's how he arrived in Panzi and got medical attention. And also that clinic, the Panzi refugee medical clinic, actually was also supported by the Catholic missionaries, the priests of Panzi parish. There is a parish, I think it is still there, a parish near Panzi. So it is called the Panzi Catholic Parish, and they are used to be priests. Those are priests actually, when RPF or Kagame invaded the DRC, he slaughtered all of them. None of them survived actually. And he accused them of supporting refugees, helping refugees. So no one of them actually survived that time when Kagame was killing them in 96. So I stayed in Panzi for some times and it got better, then started helping other people who had injuries. So I volunteered to help, and also then I got a letter from Red Cross. Red Cross, they used it to help refugees communicate and find each other. So the Red Cross sent me a letter. My parents were looking for me, hoping that I survived, because we never met since 94. Actually, since 93. So they were looking for me. Then I got the letter from my parents. Then I came to learn that they were in a refugee camp in Kibumba. So I had no money. I was broke like any other refugee. So I stayed there and helped to help other refugees. Then I started selling mandazi and mandazi.
Like donuts.
McDonald's. I started making McDonald's.
Like donuts.
using maize flour.
Yeah.
And mixing it with the cassava flour and using mawesa. Mawesa is a palm oil. So I started selling one by one, and made enough money actually to take me to Goma. So I used to go to walk all the way from Panzi and go to different camps, and also go to the port in Bukavu. There used to be a port which the ship between Bukavu city and Goma city used to dock. So I used to go there to sell the mandazi, so that also I can make a friendship with the people who operated those ships. So that was my intention, so that one day, hopefully, I would make it to Goma and see my mother. So one day I got enough money, which was not even enough, but it was enough to give it to those guys who used to work on the ship. So they allowed me to go deeper into where they put the cargo. So I went down into the cargo and stayed there so that other people cannot find me, because I didn't have money. So I didn't have even a ticket. So, and I went all the way to Goma. And when I arrived in Goma, there was another problem actually to move from Goma to Kibumba. I thought the camps were together, but it was quite of a distance. So I stayed in Goma. I started meeting kids. We were together in high school, some of them actually working as a translator for GTZ, others working. My brother, who was called Sevatware, that time he was also a first-year student in Gatovu group of schools of literature. So he was working for GTZ as a translator. So I stayed with him. He also helped me get some money to go and see my dad. So my brother, my dad had many wives. So my brother, Svatwar, he was my step brother, but we were almost the same age. Actually, he was killed in 2008 because they suspected him that he would be vying for the office of the president of the Butare National University. He wanted to be the chairman, student chairman, but the guy actually was pushed from the balcony instantly. So, and then I arrived in Kibumba, and then we stayed in Kibumba, and one day, the honeymoon in Kibumba actually ended because I arrived in late 95 and stayed there around October. The RPF, led by Kagame, of course, invaded the refugee camps. But before that, we could decide.
Was this 96, the October of which year?
Yeah, 96.
96, okay.
96,
yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. But before that, actually, so many things were happening in the refugee camp. So that time, the humanitarian organizations actually were pro-RPF. It was obvious. The first thing that the humanitarian organizations did in Rwandan Hutu refugee camps in eastern DRC is that they reduced the amount of food that they used to give. And the reason of doing that, the reason of doing that, it's because they wanted to force refugees to go back. Why? Because when RPF captured the power in Rwanda, it only captured the land. There was nothing else. Majority of more than 3/4 of Rwandans had fled Rwanda. Therefore, when the RPF was ruling Rwanda, actually there were no people in Rwanda to talk of. So it was a very big political and diplomatic issue. Sorry.
That's okay. Take your time. Yeah. Take your time. And and I also wanted to, like, as you're talking, I don't want to interrupt, but I'm like, I just wanted to acknowledge this is a really difficult story to tell. And, sorry about everything you've gone through. I mean, you were still talking, but still it's so hard. And also for your losses. So please proceed.
Thank you. So 3/4 of Rwandans had fled Rwanda. So they were in refugee camps. So the humanitarian organizations started supporting, they obviously were supporting Kagame. We Rwandans knew that because it was obvious. But what I wanted to clarify here is that organizations such as the World Food Program actually were bringing in food and the guns from Uganda as they supplied food and any other humanitarian aid. They were also bringing in guns in the preparation of the Rwandan RPF invasion into the refugee camps. So the way that they started to do it, they did it in progressive stages. The first stage is that they started denying food to refugees. They reduced from the food that they used to give to refugees, and they reduced it and they started providing refugees to refugees only 25% of the food that they used to give it to them. What that means is that the refugees started starving, and especially refugees which had families and the children started starving. So some of them decided to go back to Rwanda, although they knew the danger which was awaiting for them there. But that didn't work as both Rwanda and the Western backers and the humanitarian organizations had expected. So the next stage, because the majority of the people continued remaining, suffering, going to work for Congolese people, going to work on farms for Congolese people, and the hustle around didn't work. So the next stage was also to bribe the Mobutu's contingent. The contingent were the troops which were assigned by the Mobutu's government to protect the refugees. So those people were bribed, and they started actually working with the Kagame to kidnap prominent refugees, educated refugees, and taking them back to Rwanda. And also assassination. We started experiencing assassinations around the camps. Many people were assassinated by the RPF soldiers, commandos who came into refugee camps, facilitated by the contingent or the contingent. Yeah? The contingent was this refugee protection unit given by the Mobutu regime. So they were so corrupt, and they were all bought. Therefore, they allowed the Kagame's troops to infiltrate the camps. And
so, William,
yes.
Just to clarify, so this was before the camps were actually attacked. So these NGOs were facilitating or kind of enabling the troops to infiltrate and kill the refugees. Okay.
Actually, you find many organizations, humanitarian organizations like GOR, like RSA, International Rescue Committee, and you find others like EPZ. They are used to be an organization called the EPZ, Église Pentecost du Zaire. Those organizations worked in cahoot with the new regime in Kigali, actually, to make sure that they provide the intelligence to Rwanda, but also they enable the Rwandan soldiers to infiltrate into the camps. And
William,
yes,
just real quick to give the audience a little bit of, so we talked about the story of the invasion of the RPF. When you refer to the new regime in Rwanda, I think one of the most important points to make is that eventually the RPF, the rebel group that William is talked about, that invaded his village, slaughtered people with hand weapons and machetes, and knives and hammers, and went down across the country and also massacred those people in southern Rwanda, in Kibeho. He was in northern Rwanda, played all the way down to southern Rwanda. The RPF continued to take over the country, pursued people, killed them. The RPF is the one that took over Rwanda. So when he refers to the new regime in Rwanda, it's the RPF. When he refers to the new, the government of Rwanda, or to the Rwandan troops, it's the RPF led by Paul Kagame. The pictures of soldiers that you saw earlier, and I'm sure the studio is going to run some clips and pictures again of who was involved in those in the invasion. But just to make it clear, this was the RPF that you're referring to, that these organizations were helping with intelligence and infiltration of the camps.
Thank you, Debuke, for clarifying that. Yes, so now after we fled Rwanda in July '94, there was a new regime. The RPF actually came to power. So, and the majority of Rwandans fled into Eastern DRC. Actually, we are talking about over 4 million refugees. Here also I have to clarify something else. By 1994, Rwanda had only less than 6 million people. It's good to understand because the statistics of Rwanda have been doctored to suit the narrative of the new regime in Kigali. And when we talk about Rwanda in the 90s, it had only less than 6 million, whereby the Hutus were around 85 or between 84 and 85%. Another thing is that the Tutsis actually were around between 14 and 15%, where it was rarely mentioned in our statistics were around 1%. So it's good also to put that into context so that when we talk about majority of the people fled Rwanda, we now understand the statistics that of the people who fled Rwanda. So when we are talking about around 4 million people, Rwandans, being in exile in eastern, in refugee camps, in eastern DRC, in western Tanzania, in Burundi, in Uganda, and beyond, we are thinking about majority of the people living in Rwanda, which left Rwanda empty. So it was very hard for the RPF to justify why it captured the power in Rwanda without the people. Because you cannot claim to be a government if you don't have people you are ruling. You need people to pay taxes. So RPF had remained with less than actually 10% of the population. So it was very hard for RPF to justify the existence in Kigali. So that's why the RPF and its Western backers started working on the maneuvers to force Rwandan Hutu refugees to go back to Rwanda so that they could diplomatically and politically justify why the new regime was there. So because the majority of Rwandans did want to go back, because they knew going back it was going to the slaughterhouse, majority of the Rwandans did go back to Rwanda. So what happened? The humanitarian, Western humanitarian organization, such as UMICO, UMICO is the United Methodist Relief Commission, something like that, and the World Food Program, and the Red Cross, International Red Cross, and the Gore International, and the other humanitarian organizations actually started working closely with the Western countries, which actually gave them the money for humanitarian support to provide, to facilitate the RPF to force Rwandan Hutu refugees to go back to Rwanda. So it's good to make this one clear so that people understand the context where we were at that time. So in 95, between 95 and 96, the RPF, the Kagame soldiers, increased the activity in the refugee camps. That's Chibumba, Kahindo, Lakever, Mugunga. Chibumba actually was the largest in Eastern DRC because it hosted close to 2 million refugees. So many activities, RPF activities, were actually clear, and the refugees, some refugees saw a pile of stocks in some of the warehouse which was run by the World Food Program. There were weapons which had been shipped from Uganda into the refugee camp. So to cut the story short, by October, Rwanda, the new regime in Rwanda, the RPF, with the blessings from the West, invaded the DRC to destroy the refugee camps. but they portrayed it as if it was just about the refugee camps only, the Hutu refugees in the DRC, but it was not the case, because I remember in October when the RPF actually came, invaded Kibumba. That time it was around 3 a.m. I remember vividly when they started shooting everywhere, and you could see the shooting, the shelling, or the camps being burned, and we started running at night. So that time actually I was naked, and they almost actually meant it was naked because there was no time for us to put on anything. So we ran. Some of the people actually ran into Nyiragongo Park, the Nyiragongo National Park. What I wanted to clarify here is there are live volcanic activities. So some of the refugees ran into the park, actually were caught by the magma and burned to death. Many refugees died in the park as they were trying to flee from Kagame's men. And so in the morning, then I went all the way I fled into the park and found myself into Mugunga. Then from Mugunga, we went to Lac Vert, which is a green lake, and we stayed there for some time. And the RPF continued actually advancing into DRC, and they went to install the military weapons on the hills of Sake. So the hills of Sake, you are able to control the whole of Goma, but also you are able to control the whole of Masisi. So when they went there, and they were led by General Nyamwasa, he even admitted that the sole purpose of installing the troops at the top of Sake Hills was to push the Rwandan refugees into Lake Kivu. It was not even to return them back to Rwanda, because they had stationed the military in Goma already, didn't want people to go back to Rwanda. And the park, the Nyiragongo National Park, it was magma everywhere, live magma, still active volcanic activities in that park. The only place was safe was to go through Lake Hill, Masisi Hills. I mean Sake Hills. But the RPF had already stationed the weapons there. So practically, it's not possible to get military equipment and install them in Masisi in such a short time. It's because with the help of humanitarian organizations, especially Western humanitarian organizations, which were claiming to serve refugees, had helped them ship the equipment in the disguise of food. So as the refugees waited for the food, starving to death, all the food was busy actually bringing weapons into the refugee camp. So by the time the refugee camps were destroyed, RPF had already soldiers in Masisi. So when we were in Sake, we didn't have any options. Actually, we were just herded together like sheep, waiting to die. So on your left, there is Lake Kivu. On your right, there is live magma activities, volcanic activities. You can see the fire during the day, and see the fire see the smoke during the day, and see the fire during the night. And the only corridor to Rwanda, there was the RPF, and the RPF had put stations, which we can call, we used to call actually the triage stations. The triage stations is where the refugees who chose to go back to Rwanda the RPF selected young people and they educated the people, and young Hutus and educated Hutus, and they diverted them to the slaughter place, which they used to call Golgotha. So the Golgotha stations were in Mugunga, in the forest, where they used to take young people to kill them. So if you went with your parents and you are a young person in your 20s, in 17, 16, 15, and all your parents are educated, they always removed them and they led them to Golgotha place. The Golgotha place, that's where Agafoni, the Hammer, the RPF Hammer did its job, where they just smashed your head and they leave you to die there. So thousands of Rwandans who tempted to go back, actually, many of them were led to Golgotha. And those who managed to escape came back to Sake. So they were telling us the stories of what they had seen. So as we stood there in Sake, we didn't know what to do. Then there was another twist to this story, where personally, anyone who was in Sake will tell you that there was a pickup car, military car, where there were two white soldiers, and they had an American accent. You can tell. They had American accent, actually using megaphones to call refugees to go back to Rwanda. And they were saying, you have no options. You either drown yourself into Lake Kivu, or you go back to Rwanda because you have no options. So there is only one corridor. If you attempt to go further, you can see the soldiers are all around. So you have no choice. The only choice you have is to go back to Rwanda. The guy could actually say it in Kinyarwanda, broken Kinyarwanda. You could tell this is not a Rwandese, but he had rehearsed. To have someone coming, a foreign military coming to the situation actually showed how the whole thing had been planned. So one night, because there was no options, refugees came together one night and say, dying is dying, it's a death. Instead of being drowned into Lake Kivu or going to be smashed the scars in the Mugunga, we better go all the way to Masisi and confront these people on Sake Hills. So that's what happened. And very early in the morning, around 3, all refugees, millions and millions of refugees, went and climbed Sake Hills. And by morning, when around 6 or 5, when the sun comes out, the Rwandan patriotic soldiers realized that millions and millions were closer to them. So they were shouting, saying, catch those people, catch them, catch them. So as the refugees sang the song of catch them, the RPF, the Nyamwasa soldiers got scared and they ran away and they left all the military equipment there. So it was a fight from morning all the way to around 3. Many people died, many refugees died, but by evening, the RPF had been defeated, refugees had taken over the weapons, and the women were celebrating, people dancing. So that's how we managed to go all the way to Masisi. So my journey